Good morning, Water's Edge. Let's stand and prepare our hearts for worship.
Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you never failed me yet. I know the night won't last, your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you never fail. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you never fail me yet. I see you move the mountain. I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way. I believe I'll see you do it again. You move the mountain. I believe I'll see you do it again. Made a way when there was no way. I believe I'll see you do it again. 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 Your promise still stands, Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail me yet.
God, we thank you for so many of the things that are unchanging about you, and your faithfulness being one of those main things, God, that we can just put our trust in you and know, God, that even though the walls are broken down, that you are still faithful through it all, God. We can put our trust in you. In the darkness, we were waiting without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There is mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and promise. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom come, and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, nor even in your suffering you sought to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. This morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel to the Lord shall not fear, shall not fail. By His blood and in His name, He is free, and I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in
my way. I wonder if my life could really change at all. All this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground? You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. All around, hope is springing up from this old ground. Out of chaos, life is being found in you. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us.
You make me new. You are making me new. You make me new. You are making me new. You make me new. You are making me new. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make me new. You are making me new. You make me new. You are making me new. You make me new. You are making me new. You make me new. You are making every single day, making us new and molding us into what you want, God. We just thank you that you are the potter and that we are the clay, God, and you can mold us however you want, God. And I just pray that we will just have willing hearts and minds, God, to let you do what you know is best in our lives, to lead us and to ultimately give you glory in everything that we do, God, but that you will receive all the glory and honor, God. And I just thank you that you can make such beautiful things from such broken things. God, I just pray that we will not forget this and we'll hold on to this and we'll go forth and continue to grow, God. Just mold us into what you want. In your precious name, amen. Kids, Awana kids are dismissed today.
It's great to be with you again this morning. Glad that you are here. And as we learn, as we worship together, it's just fun to be gathered with other Christians. Sunday mornings are a neat thing, if for nothing else. They are neat because it pulls us into focus again for the week, where we say, hey, we're going to put God first this week again in our lives. We're going to begin today with some scriptures. We're going to put them right up there right away. And the first one would be, I can't quite read it back there, I'll turn around. And he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf. And then we continue in Colossians, do not lie to one another, since you laid aside the old self with its evil practices. And you have put on the new self, who is being renewed to a true knowledge according to the image of the one who created him. I picked those scriptures out of maybe 25, 30, 40 different choices. There are many, many choices that we have in the Bible to pick scriptures that say this. We're picturing a coat, we're taking off the old coat, and we're putting on a new coat. We're taking off the old and putting on the new. Romans 12, 1 and 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so we are to be different people if we are to be walking with Christ than other people, in that we become Christ-centered. We talk about this a lot. I read those verses, hundreds of times. Growing up, I heard about this. It was just something that was part of me. Oh yeah, we're to be new. We're to have new lives. Christ redeemed us, and so on. As I got into my first year of Bible college at Western Bible College, I took a test. It was called a Taylor-Johnson personality analysis test. And I don't know if you've taken personality tests or not. I've taken several since then, the DISC test, and took one this week about your abilities test, or I've taken those. And anyway, I take this Taylor-Johnson, and I sit down with one of my teachers, professors in college, named Dick Rollins. And he goes over the results of the test with me. And there were a couple of spots that that were a little bit almost off the charts. And so he said something to me about taking it again when school is complete and comparing the two. And so he said, you know, we need to see a change, hopefully, in a couple of areas. And I thought to myself, what's the matter with him? He then gave me a book, and he said to me, you need to read this book, and you need to put into practice this book. He gave me the book, and I just kind of thought, you know, whatever, guess I'll read it. As a result of reading that book, this prayer, I wrote this prayer. The name of the book was The God Players. The God Players. Earl Jabay, Jabay. If you want to go online, you can find it. It's been out of print for 25, 30 years, maybe 40 years. I don't know. I have a couple copies. I've given away a lot of copies. Some people read it and just really doesn't hit them. They can't relate, don't want to relate. Others of us get hit right between the eyes. As a result of reading that book, I wrote this prayer. I read that book and I began to understand that those words in the Bible are not just words to kind of read and go, oh yeah, we're new people in Christ. Those are words that we need to put into practice, and they're very difficult to put into practice in reality. From then leaving school, I pastored a church in Glasgow, Montana for 12 years. When I got there, I got involved with CDC, Chemical Dependency Centers, in working third and fifth steps. Third steps, I'm going to surrender my will to a higher power. Fifth steps, I'm going to confess everything I've ever done and start out new. And so I worked with people on the surrender part and on the confession part. And I began to realize that the book I read, because that was written from the perspective of dealing with alcoholics, from the book I read, The God Players, to what I was now doing, I began thinking, I wonder where I am at in this process. And I began thinking, you know, every Christian needs this, not just me. Every Christian needs this. That way, if I could focus on all the other Christians that need it, I didn't have to look at myself so much. So if every Christian needed this, and if this is such an important concept, why don't we get it in our churches? Why aren't Christians getting it? And here's what we're not getting. We actually, although we say we are living with God and in cooperation with God, we actually are living in competition with God. And we Christians don't like to admit that, and we don't like to see it in our own lives. And as I read that book, and as I worked with third and fifth steps, I realized that I was one of the most guilty ones there ever was in living in competition with God rather than cooperation with Him. There are things that tell us that. Have you ever said, and have I ever said, yeah, well, that's the way the big guy upstairs wants it. Well, I guess that's what he wants. Do we live so much in competition with God that we do not really even want to speak his name? I'll just talk about the big guy. The man upstairs. I don't want to call him God because I want to be in control of my own life and I want to be God in my own life. And if I want to be God in my own life, then I'm in competition with the God of the universe. Have you ever run into people who like to control everything? Yeah. What's wrong with letting the God of the universe control it? Have you ever heard people, they say things like when they get angry, they don't say Joe Smith. They say Jesus Christ. Why? Because they are living in competition with God. And they are saying to God, you could let me control this. You should have let me control this. I should be able to control this. And since something went wrong and I smashed my finger, I'm giving myself permission to damn God and to blame Jesus. And that's the only time we really feel comfortable talking about the things of God. I've sat with people and they're swearing and cussing and I say to them, your voice has the wrong tone and you're in the wrong place to be using those words. And they will look at me like, what? I said, those are church words and you're not in church. Those are words that surrendered people use. People who have God at the center of their life, who are not living in competition with him. When we live in competition with God, we are free to say his name in vain. When we are in competition with others, we are free to badmouth them. We think we are, we really aren't. And when we're living in competition with God, we are free to tell God he's doing it wrong. Living in competition with God is actually a pretty scary thing, and it's actually something that none of us want to admit. As I worked with the third and fifth steps, I realized that I needed to work on myself. And I needed to move away from competing with God to working on his side. That's why I wrote this prayer. I wrote this prayer and I prayed this prayer many, many times over the years. I especially prayed this prayer when God wasn't doing things the way I figured he should be. Especially in hard times. Many times I got on my knees and I laid this prayer in front of me and I began to read it. Because I needed to say, God, you're in control, not me. I want you to be in control. even though I am afraid of letting you be in control, because I trust myself to be in control more than I trust you. And we as Christians we just stand back and we're afraid, really, to 100% release our lives to God. So I wrote this prayer, and then I used it a lot. Never really told anybody about it, because it kind of runs against the grain. I wrote a prayer. Is that putting me front and center? I don't want to be front and center. It's not a prayer for everybody to read. In a sense, I'm embarrassed for putting it out there. I had a wise Christian who read it. I gave it to a few. I wrote it at first and put anonymous on the bottom, and he read it and he said, "Who wrote it? Where'd you get this?" And I told him, and he says, "God can use you to write something that's good. You don't need to be embarrassed about it." Yeah, but I said it runs against the grain of what I'm actually saying, because I don't want the attention to come to me. I want the intention to pierce my heart and anyone else who reads this prayer. By the way, I have just a few copies. So I left some copies on a couple tables back there. You're going to have to take pictures again if you want a copy of it. I learned that I was living in competition with God. Let me illustrate that in another way. We play God every time we get in our cars. Who is the best driver on the road? Me. Every other car, every other vehicle on the road should know that I am the best driver. They should know that I am on a time schedule, and they should be driving the speed I want them to be driving. And when I come up behind somebody who's driving too slow, what's the matter with them? What's the matter with me? Why does God need to put them on my time schedule? People pull out in front of me. Happens all the time. I got a sign on the front of my car. Pull out in front of me. Happens just, and I think, well, yeah. Whose schedule are you on? Your own or God's? And of course, the guy who pulled out, it's his fault that you're going to be late. It's not your fault because you didn't start 5 minutes earlier. We blame God. We live in competition with God. We don't like to admit that, but we do. On the back side of this prayer, it's written, it's black with white lettering, rather than white with black lettering. It's black with white. A friend of mine who I fish with, he and I have been through a whole bunch of stuff together. He was struggling with an addiction, and that's how we got to know one another. And I wrote this prayer, and before I wrote this side, I wrote this side. And I wrote it because it was true of me, and I hated to admit it. I gave it to a friend of mine, and I said to him, here, read this. You're an addict, got an addiction, you're struggling. I said, here, read this. And he started reading it, and he busted out laughing. And he said, Dallas, that's exactly what I am. He said, it's so true that I got to laugh, or I got to get on my knees and bawl. Title of it is Self-Centered Me. I give the orders around here and plan to protect myself. So I will direct people and circumstances and control my environment to meet my need to feel good and avoid pain. When things are not going my way and others are not listening to me, I will order God in prayer to change people and to change things. I have every right to feel good and live pain-free. I demand the cooperation of God, circumstances, and others. I am number one, and I intend to keep it that way. You're not laughing, so I hope you're crying. That's a pretty sad statement, isn't it? And if we Christians are honest, we live a lot of our lives right there. And I'll tell you what addicts do. They live their lives right there. And we as Christians need to transform, renew our minds so that we will know what the will of God is. The good, acceptable, perfect will of God. Romans 12:2. And yet we want to place ourselves in a position where we control things. Have you ever met a policeman in uniform? Policeman, policewoman, don't care, a police person, a uniform. Have you ever wondered why you see a person in a police uniform and you kind of get a little bit of a take back, a little. Have you ever wondered why you get that feeling? Because a uniform reminds us that we're not number one. That there is an authority greater than our authority. And if a policeman, whether stops you on the highway or confronts you in a bar or wherever you are, why do we want to push back against that? Because we're number one. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I don't want anybody pushing me around. I don't want to have to answer to anybody. And when I see somebody in uniform, even the postman in uniform, I think, God, am I surrendered? I don't want to answer to anybody. When someone with authority comes up and they say, well, you're not allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do that, what is our first response? Usually it's one of these raising of, I want to push back against that. It starts when we're young. Ever had any children? Ever been around kids? They know what they want, and they know when they want it. They're not afraid to tell you, right? And they're not afraid in a play yard, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, to go take a toy from another kid because I want that toy. And it belongs to me. We are people who need to work really hard on getting God in the center of our lives. And if you think he's there in your life, I got news for you. He's not. I've been working on this for years. I'll work on it the rest of my life. It gets better, but I catch myself all the time going, oh, that's God doing something. That's God's schedule. That's God's person. I meet a person I don't like. You've done that, right? You run across, you meet some person and they don't like you and you don't like them for some reason. It just kind of have a little personality clash, right? Is that God saying something to you? Is that God saying, well, I made that person too? And when you run into another person who is a God player just like you are, or just like I am, all of a sudden there can be some major conflict. It doesn't mean we need to lay down and be a doormat. But it does mean that God's at work in our lives. And I think that we are really missing the boat when we think, I can live my life without pain. I can live my life without suffering. God, you fix it. If I'm suffering, fix it. God, it's your fault. We've just learned the Christian language real well. And we don't say that directly. You know what? God can fix anything, right? God can. God could give us pain-free lives. If you have a pain-free life, I'd like to talk to you. I've never met anybody yet who's had a pain-free life. The question is, what are we using the pain for? To push back against God and to push back against life? Or to accept it and to work through it? And when I'm talking about pain, I'm not just talking about physical pain here. When I worked in chemical dependency, I learned one thing that just really, I hear it very little. Now and then I hear it. Alcohol's not the problem. Drugs are not the problem. Sexual addiction, there's 3 big addictions. It's something to do with chemicals, tobacco, it's something to do with sex, or it's something to do with gambling. Those are the 3 big addictions. Everything else seems to kind of flow from those. One of those 3. But it's not about the chemicals, it's not about the sex, and it's not about gambling. Gambling isn't the problem. Sexual addiction is not the problem. Chemical addiction, alcohol or harder drugs or whatever, that's not the problem. Listen carefully. It is the solution. The problem is, I'm hurting. God has given me a raw deal. And I'm going to fix the problem by becoming an addict, because then I don't have to feel anything anymore. I can get drunk and I don't have to feel anything. I can do something and I don't have to feel anything anymore. And I want to get out of my pain. And so what do? We choose to take our way out rather than God's way out. And when we take our way out, it leads to more pain. God never said you're going to live a pain-free life and you're going to just die of a heart attack at 105. And God never said that. I don't even know where we get that from. Think about this for just a second. Read in the Bible, start in Genesis and read through it and circle all the names of all the people who live pain-free lives. You just can't find them. Let's not live in competition with God and in competition with one another. Let's live in cooperation with God and cooperation with one another. I can remember reading this prayer on my knees and literally shaking. I can remember a few times I did do that. I went through some really hard times, very painful times. God could have fixed them, but he wasn't listening to me, wasn't doing this side. He was doing it his way. And believe it or not, I had to admit I had some rough edges. God's taken the sandpaper to me a few times. The edges aren't quite as rough as they used to be. There probably are a few left. I'm not even probably, I'm positive there are some left. And I can remember reading this prayer and shaking, going, I hate to give up my self-control and follow God. A little bit of a heavy subject today, but might God use it? Let me read this. God, forgive me for taking your rightful place as the center of life. I'm turning in my resignation. You are the center of life. I resign from self-serving and self-centeredness. God, you are in control. I yield to you the right to control all people and all things. I give up my self-appointed right for self-protection, self-preservation, and pain-free living. You, Lord God, are number one. I am not. I am beside and equal to my fellow human beings. God, I will listen to you. I will obey you. I will give up demanding that you change people and circumstances to meet my need to feel good and avoid pain. I have no need except to know you, Lord, through your Son, Jesus Christ. I resign from running my own life and know that only your divine power can save. Lord, I am now willing to follow you. I yield control of my life to you in Jesus' name. Pray that prayer every morning. Your day will be different. I call it the surrender prayer because in AA there's a thing called the serenity prayer. I call this the surrender prayer, because we need to surrender our lives to God and in a completely new way. And I hope I was able to communicate that this morning. And I don't want any glory over any of this. Give it to God. There's a song, we sing it, the old hymn, I Surrender All. You know, it's easy to sing some of these old hymns and not pay any attention to the words. And then something cool is happening nowadays. There are some very talented songwriters who take old hymns and they rewrite them and they make them into new songs. So last week I said to Caleb, hey, Caleb, have you ever heard this song, I Surrender All? He knew the old hymn. I said, have you heard the new version? He said, no. He says, can you work it up for next week? This is a great guy. He says, I'll look at it, and I'll bet you I can do that. And these guys got together, and they did it. We'll hear the new version. It's a beautiful version of I Surrender All. Pay attention to the words. Pay attention to your heart. Give it all to God. Let Him be in control. I surrender all.
All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him. In His presence I will live. All to Jesus I surrender. Save and make me wholly thine. Let me feel your Holy Spirit. Truly know that you are mine. All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him, and in His presence I will live. I surrender all. I surrender all.
Oh, to Jesus I surrender. Lord, I give myself to Thee. Fill me with your love and power. Let your blessing fall on me. All to Jesus I surrender. Now I feel the sacred flame. Oh, the joy of your salvation. Glory, glory to His name.
All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him, and in His presence I will live. I surrender all.
At your feet I lay me down, all my scars and all my crowns. Jesus, I surrender all.
I surrender all.
No more having my own way, no more chasing yesterday. Jesus, I surrender all.
All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I everything all to Jesus. I surrender all to Him. I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him. And in His presence I will live. I surrender all. I surrender all.
So as we close this morning, Caleb and the team are going to continue to play, and feel free to stay and reflect or pray. We'll have prayer people in the corners if you'd like someone to pray with you. Feel free to leave at whatever point and engage in conversation in the fellowship area. So with that said, and the benediction, like Rev said today, like Caleb said today, let us not compete with the Lord, but let us surrender all.